When Florida announced it would fight its deadly snake crisis by releasing more snakes, specifically hundreds of rare venom-proof predators, headline writers called the idea insane. Jokes exploded online. But behind the mockery, Florida was acting on a catastrophic truth. Invasive pythons had wiped out up to 99% of local mammals, while venomous snakes surged unchecked. Their risky plan would defy ridicule and become a national model. To understand how adding snakes saved an ecosystem, you have to see the scale of the collapse that demanded it. Biologists began counting mammals in the Everglades and found almost nothing left. The numbers were stark. In areas where Burmese pythons had taken hold, raccoon populations fell by 99%, opossums dropped by 98.9%, and bobcats by 87%. Marsh rabbits and foxes all but disappeared. These were not estimates or guesses. These were results from field surveys, night after night over years. Researchers set up motion-triggered cameras and walked transects, recording every sighting, every track, every absence. The data held up across seasons and sites. In some places, 100 traps would yield a single gaunt opossum, if anything at all. The Everglades, once thick with the rustle and movement of small mammals, now lay eerily quiet. The collapse didn't stop with the obvious. The loss of raccoons and opossums meant fewer scavengers to clean up carrion and fewer prey for hawks and owls. Bobcats, once common, were now rare enough to name individually. The ecosystem's web had frayed to the breaking point. Survey teams published their findings in peer-reviewed journals, reporting confidence intervals so tight they left little room for doubt. In python-invaded zones, native mammals had been nearly erased. Out in the sawgrass, the silence became a warning. The animals that survived did so in isolated pockets, cut off by water, roads, or luck. The rest had vanished. The data sheets told the story. Row after row of zeros, punctuated by the rare, fading sign of life. The scale of loss was so extreme that even seasoned field biologists, used to cycles of boom and bust, struggled to process what they saw. The Everglades' familiar faces, masked raccoons, bright-eyed opossums, lithe bobcats, had been reduced to memory. The scientists who recorded these numbers understood what was at stake. Without intervention, the collapse would continue. The question was no longer whether action was needed, but what could possibly restore balance to a landscape so thoroughly emptied. Venomous snakes filled the silence left behind. With raccoons and opossums nearly gone, nothing remained to scavenge, nothing to disturb the underbrush, nothing to challenge the old order. Rattlesnakes, copperheads, and coral snakes, once part of the background, now slipped through the grass in growing numbers. Reports of close calls and bites edged upward in rural neighborhoods and along park trails. At dusk, headlights caught thick bodies stretched across backroads, and field notes from biologists began to mention not just the absence of mammals, but the frequency of venomous encounters. The Everglades had always hosted dangerous snakes, but balance kept them in check. Without natural predators, their numbers could expand unchecked, their ranges stretching into places where people and pets now lived without the buffer of small mammals. Hunters and hikers described seeing more rattlesnakes than ever before, sometimes several in a single day. Emergency rooms logged a steady trickle of snakebite cases, each one a reminder that the web of life had torn in more ways than one. The old guardians, predators that once kept venomous snakes wary and on the move, were missing. The eastern indigo snake, immune to venom and bold enough to hunt other snakes, had vanished from most of its range decades earlier. Without it, the checks and balances that once kept the ecosystem stable had collapsed. The ground layer, once alive with the scurry of prey and the stealth of hunters, now belong to the unchallenged. Field teams collecting data found that even as mammals vanished, sightings of venomous snakes increased. In some survey zones, the only life caught on camera was a rattlesnake coiled in the shade. The scientists' logbooks filled with warnings: watch your step, check your boots, do not reach blindly. The absence of one predator had given free rein to another, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. The surge in venomous snakes was not just a nuisance or a hazard. It was a sign that the system had lost its balance, that the old rules no longer held. Without a safe apex controller, every step in the grass carried new risks. The question now was whether anything could restore order to a landscape spinning further out of control. The eastern indigo snake moves through the longleaf pine like a shadow, nearly 8 feet from nose to tail. Its scales shine blue-black in the sun, a color so dark it absorbs the light around it. Unlike most snakes, the indigo is built for dominance, not stealth. It is North America's longest native snake, and it acts the part. Where other snakes coil and wait, the indigo hunts in daylight. It covers ground quickly, using its size and speed to track prey across open sandhills and through tangled undergrowth. Its appetite is legendary. The indigo eats almost anything it can overpower: small mammals, birds, lizards, and especially other snakes. Rattlesnakes, copperheads, even coral snakes all fall to the indigo's attack. What sets it apart is not just its strength, but its immunity. The eastern indigo is unaffected by the venom of its most dangerous prey. A rattlesnake strike means nothing. The indigo grabs its rival behind the head, pins it down, and swallows it whole. No other native predator can do this. This immunity is more than a quirk of evolution. It is a key to balance. The indigo keeps venomous snakes wary and on the move, never letting any one species dominate the ground. It hunts without fear, clearing the way for other animals to thrive. In the wild, the presence of an indigo signals safety for everything that lives beneath the pines. When the indigo vanished, that security vanished with it. Now, as biologists work to bring it back, they are restoring not just a species, but an ancient order that once kept the ecosystem in check. The eastern indigo snake's disappearance was not a mystery of nature, but a direct result of human actions. In the early 20th century, vast stretches of longleaf pine forest once covered the southeast. That landscape shrank with every new sawmill and logging contract. By the time the last big tracts were counted, 97% of the original longleaf pine ecosystem was gone. The forest that supported indigos for millennia had been reduced to scattered fragments, too small, too isolated to sustain a population of wide-ranging hunters. Roads carved the remaining habitat into pieces. Every year, dozens of adult indigos tried to cross highways in search of mates or food and never made it to the other side. Tire tracks and broken bodies became a common sight along the margins of new developments. At the same time, the pet trade boomed. Collectors paid top dollar for rare snakes, and indigos were prized for their size and beauty. Thousands were taken from the wild, boxed up, and shipped far from their native sandhills. By 1978, the damage could no longer be ignored. The eastern indigo snake became the first American snake listed as federally threatened, a legal recognition that the species was on the brink. But the law could not restore what had already been erased. The forests were gone, the roads were permanent, and the wild snakes had vanished from most of their range. The loss was not just ecological, it was a moral failure, a reminder that the destruction of a guardian species carries consequences for every living thing, that depends on balance. The need to put things right had become urgent, not just for the indigo, but for the land itself. At the Oriane Center for Indigo Conservation, the process begins long before a snake ever touches Florida sand. Each eastern indigo is bred in captivity and hatched from carefully selected pairs to preserve genetic diversity. For nearly 2 years, young snakes are raised behind locked doors, fed, weighed, and checked for disease. Only the strongest and healthiest are chosen for release. Every snake is implanted with a tiny microchip no larger than a grain of rice, giving each animal a unique identity for the rest of its life. Site preparation at Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve is just as meticulous. Teams survey a 6,500-acre landscape, searching for restored longleaf pine and wiregrass, habitat that can support a top predator. They check for gopher tortoise burrows, which provide shelter for indigos, and they monitor prey populations to ensure there is enough food to sustain a new arrival. The release team coordinates with land managers, biologists, and volunteers, sometimes gathering 50 people for a single morning of work. On release day, snakes travel in soft cloth bags, one to a bundle, each tagged and logged. Biologists record weather, temperature, and precise GPS coordinates for every release. The snakes are set free near tortoise burrows, giving them a safe start. The work does not end there. Researchers return again and again, tracking the snakes by radio and recapturing them for health checks. Microchips confirm identities, while telemetry antennas pick up faint signals from snakes moving through the grass. Every step is designed to minimize risk and maximize survival. The program partners, the Nature Conservancy, Florida Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Central Florida Zoo share data and adjust protocols as needed. With over 200 snakes released since 2017, each animal's journey is documented and each outcome scrutinized. The process is slow, deliberate, and built on decades of lessons from failed reintroductions elsewhere. Nothing is left to chance. The hope is that, given the right conditions, these rare predators will not just survive, but reclaim their ancient role in the wild. Autumn brought the kind of news that field biologists dream about but rarely expect. On a routine morning at the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve, a researcher lifted a slab of pine bark and found something no one had seen there in over 40 years, a wild-born eastern indigo snake, scarcely longer than a pencil, its scales already deep blue. The hatchling was unmistakable. Its skin gleamed with the same oil-slick sheen as its parents, but its presence meant something new. The reintroduced indigos were not just surviving, they were breeding. Another hatchling turned up a few days later, tucked in the leaf litter near a gopher tortoise burrow. Both were too young to have been part of any release. Their size, their timing, and the absence of any matching microchip confirmed it. They were the offspring of snakes released years before. Not lab-raised, not tagged, not handled by human hands. These were wild snakes, born free in the restored pine. For the scientists who had spent years tracking adults through the wiregrass, the discovery was more than a milestone. It was proof that the long, careful process, breeding, head starting, monitoring, and habitat restoration had finally crossed a threshold. The wild was taking over where the lab left off. Every radio signal, every health check, every sleepless night spent searching the sandhills had led to this moment. The hatchlings themselves became symbols. Tiny but fierce, they carried the legacy of a species almost lost. Their appearance meant that the ecosystem could support not just the adults, but a new generation. One that would never know a world without burrows to hide in or prey to stalk. The data sheets recorded the find, but the real impact rippled through everyone involved. For the first time in decades, the ancient rhythm of life in the pine woods had resumed. The eastern indigo snake was home again, and it was starting a family. Home. At Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve, the first signs of change came quietly. Field notes began to record fresh evidence: shed skins near tortoise burrows, the remains of a copperhead half swallowed and abandoned, rodent trails that ended abruptly in the sand. Biologists tracking the released indigos found their transmitters leading to sites where rattlesnakes had once basked undisturbed. Now, those spots showed drag marks and scattered scales. The indigos were hunting as they had for thousands of years, targeting venomous snakes and small mammals with the same boldness that once made them legendary. Camera traps caught fleeting glimpses of indigos emerging from burrows at dawn, jaws stretched wide around a cotton rat or a juvenile snake. In the months following each release, researchers logged fewer rodent burrows in the immediate area, an early clue that predation pressure was shifting. The diet of the indigo, confirmed by field observations and the occasional regurgitated pellet, matched the old accounts: snakes, rodents, even the occasional hatchling python, though the latter remained rare and unverified in official reports. The ecosystem responded in subtle but measurable ways. Reports of venomous snake sightings near trails began to level off, and the frequency of rodent damage to restoration plantings dropped. For the first time since the reintroduction began, the preserve's food web showed signs of complexity returning. Each observation, each empty rodent burrow, each missing rattlesnake hinted at a landscape slowly remembering how to balance itself. Alabama watched Florida's experiment with careful attention. Conservationists at Conecuh National Forest had been preparing for years, restoring longleaf pine habitat and working with the same breeding partners as Florida. In 2019, a field biologist turned over a patch of wiregrass and found what had been missing for more than half a century. A wild-born eastern indigo snake was there. The hatchling was small, but its presence confirmed that reintroduced adults were surviving and reproducing in the wild. For Alabama, this was more than a milestone. It was proof that the model could work outside Florida's borders. Other states took notice. Georgia, once home to thriving indigo populations, began drafting plans to bring the snake back to its native sandhills. State agencies across the Southeast requested protocols, training, and genetic stock from the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation. Conservation groups and government biologists compared notes, refining release techniques and monitoring strategies. The idea that started as a local gamble began to spread, reshaping how states thought about restoring lost predators. The blueprint was no longer just Florida's. It was becoming a regional template for bringing balance back to southern ecosystems. Today, eastern indigos hunt where they hadn't for decades, restoring an ancient balance with every silent glide. As states scramble for solutions to invasive species, Florida's risk has become a new standard. Sometimes the best fix is to trust what nature designed. The lesson is simple but urgent. Restoration isn't nostalgia, it is survival. So what other answers are we still laughing off? Share your thoughts below.